Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. Today, Attorney General Brian Frosh, in partnership with the Maryland Access to Justice Commission, is launching the Attorney General's COVID-19 Access to Justice Task Force. The agenda for today's virtual press conference will begin with the AG giving brief remarks. He'll be followed by Chief Judge Mary Ellen Barbera. She's the Chief Judge of the Maryland Court of Appeals, followed by Wilhelm Joseph, Executive Director of Maryland Legal Aid, and also a member of the Attorney General's Task Force. We will then briefly hear from Marylanders directly affected by the impact of COVID-19, followed by Rena Shaw, Executive Director of the Maryland Access to Justice Commission and also Vice Chair of the Task Force. We will then open the press conference up for comments from members of the Congressional Advisory Committee and questions from the media. That's the quick rundown for today's agenda. And right now I am pleased to introduce Maryland's Attorney General, Brian Frosh.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you to those members of this task force who are here and to the many distinguished guests that we have. I'm going to ask that we put up the slides of the members because there are over 40. I can't recognize everybody, but we have many talented, dedicated public servants and individuals who have agreed to serve. Let's take a second and look at these folks. The vice chair is Rena Shaw and Judge Andre Davis, formerly of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. And we have our United States senators, many congressmen, and very many other distinguished members. We have members of the Maryland Senate, besides almost our entire congressional delegation. We have 3 members of the Maryland Senate, 3 members of the Maryland House, former Chief Judge Bell, Ward Coe, who's the chairman of the Access to Justice Commission itself. Keep rolling. And you can see, I mean, we really have an outstanding, I would call, blue ribbon commission. And while you continue to scroll through the list, let me start so we don't have this run all morning. And I want to say the idea for this task force was conceived soon after it was clear that the COVID-19 pandemic was going to hit our nation and hit it hard. I think that it's important to acknowledge that in the middle of this crisis, we've been consumed for the past couple of weeks, and rightly so, about horrific examples of injustice culminating with the murder of George Floyd, one that we watched in slow motion more than 8 minutes while he begged for his life. Unnecessary, unjustified, preventable, inexcusable, and it followed deaths recently of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and of course, many others. I have to say that African Americans, and most especially men, die at the hands of and in the custody of police far too often, and at rates greatly surpassing the representation in the community at large. These deaths and the pandemic have laid bare the facts that, one, in Maryland today, there are hundreds of thousands of people who suffer from discrimination, lack of educational or employment opportunities, poor health care. 2, hundreds of thousands are imminently facing joblessness, homelessness, and hunger. 3, African Americans, Hispanics, people of color are disproportionately represented among these vulnerable populations. And finally, hundreds of thousands more are suffering right along with them. The pandemic has caused these issues to burst into flames. People are sick and dying, businesses are closing, people are being laid off, fired, unable to work, unable to get an education, in danger of being evicted or foreclosed upon, unable to access public benefits for food, employment, and many other things. And the pandemic has exposed and exacerbated the fault lines of inequality and need that permeate our state and our country. You don't get to a place like this unless there are problems with the legal system. There are lots of problems in our society, but the legal system should put the rich and the poor and the black, the brown, and the white all on equal footing. People without means are at a huge disadvantage when they bump into our legal system. The famous abolitionist Wendell Phillips said, "The first duty of society is justice." This task force will address our civil justice system. We won't solve all of the problems that we've got, but we've brought together some of the best, smartest people in our state from every sector: legal, housing, employment, business, nonprofit, education, government. We will be intentional and transparent in our commitment to developing recommendations for reform through a lens of racial equity. We've worked hard to ensure that the task force includes representatives of those communities most impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and by systemic racial discrimination. We formed a policy and equity committee that will be led by our vice chairs and our civil rights chief, Zanita Wickham Hurley. They will work with other committee chairs to ensure, subcommittee chairs, to ensure that considerations of equity and disparate impact are kept at the forefront of our deliberations. It's now my pleasure to introduce the Chief Judge of the Maryland Court of Appeals, Judge Mary Ellen Barbera. Chief Judge Barbera was appointed to the Court of Appeals in 2008. She became the chief in 2013. She's previously served on the Court of Special Appeals. And perhaps most importantly, she previously served as the chief of the Criminal Appeals Division in the Office of the Attorney General. She's been a school teacher. She's a Baltimore woman. She grew up in Baltimore, in Baltimore, was educated in Maryland. Let me also say, she has been a great advocate for justice reform. She led the charge on reducing the role of money bail in our legal system, which has resulted in thousands fewer folks being held before they've been convicted. And she has lent us, the task force, two of her best people, Judge Kathleen Cox and Judge Stacey Mayer, to help us in our efforts. Judge Barbera.
Thank you very much, General Frosch, for those kind remarks. And thank you for including me in today's very important event. Many thanks to you and the Access to Justice Commission of the Maryland State Bar Association for forming this timely and much needed task force. Thank you for bringing together those of us like, and I must include him right at the head of the list, my Chief Judge Robert McBell. Also, I know we will be hearing from Wilhelm Joseph this morning, Director of Maryland's Legal Aid, both of whom are committed to access to justice for all in our state. My hope is that this, the COVID-19 Access to Justice Task Force, will identify how we, the branches of government, the legal community, and the people together can dismantle obstacles to equality. In the judiciary, we have learned much from the COVID-19 pandemic emergency operations. We have learned how to provide essential operations in new ways. We are among the leaders in the nation in access to justice because of the work of so many people here in Maryland. And we point directly this morning and going forward in civil matters. We are deeply concerned and need to do more work. But that is simply not enough. As we all know, 4 out of 5 people needing legal services are waiting. They're waiting for us to help. And we cannot let them stand waiting. The challenges before us continue to be great, perhaps even greater than we had imagined. We, all of us, stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, those who, with courage and resolve, moved the arc of the moral universe toward justice. We can do no less. Thank you again for including me this morning. I wish I could stay for all of the presentations this morning, General Frosch. I don't know if you were made aware of the fact that I have another meeting right on the heels of this that I must attend since I'm leading the meeting. I want you to know, though, before I go, that the COVID-19 pandemic and the recent weeks that you have rightly highlighted for us have shown us that we need to think anew to ensure access to justice, and to do so with all the voices in our communities. We cannot afford to splinter the work to achieve equal justice under law, and this task force, I am convinced, will provide the mechanism for that work. I know that all of us, everyone in this room, all the speakers, we together will need to find a way for those without means who face important, even life-changing or life-saving legal issues to obtain the legal services, and yes, representation that they cannot afford. Despite the fact that we have made extraordinary efforts in Maryland, and hats off to Wilhelm Joseph, who leads the amazing Maryland Legal Aid Organization and other local pro bono organizations. And we, as the Maryland Judiciary, are proud to help fund those organizations. So again, I will say, I hope to stay for all of this, but my guess, I'm probably going to have to run early, for which I do apologize, and do forgive me. Thank you for including me this morning, General Frosch.
Judge Barbera, thank you very much for your remarks, but even more for your help in putting this task force together and your great work. And of course, we understand that justice calls. You've got to continue to work it, and we appreciate whatever time you can continue to spend with us. But please take care of our judicial system. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Wilhelm Joseph. Wilhelm has been the head of Maryland Legal Aid since 1996. Before that, and I think for his entire professional career, as far as I can tell, has been involved in justice issues, representation of poor people. He is a relentless advocate, absolutely tireless. And most importantly, he's extremely effective. Nobody does a better job in our state of standing up for people without means. And we deeply appreciate his participation in this task force. Wilhelm.
Good morning.
I just did something.
General Frosch. Thank you very much for thinking that I could contribute to this auspicious task force. You are a great leader. Thank you, Chief Judge Barbera, for all you do. And thank you to all the members of this task force who will be coming together to deal with some very serious issues. This is a difficult morning. I have not slept. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been tossing about the seriousness of what we face. I want to engage every one of you for a few seconds every one of you, in a very brief exercise. I want the press to engage. I want the Congress people to engage, everyone. What I want you to do is to hold your breath on the count of 3. I will be counting the seconds. On the count of 3, when you do that, don't breathe through your mouth. Don't breathe through your nostril. Don't take a swallow. Before you do that, I want you to think of your loved ones. Think of your cohorts. Think of your plans for tomorrow. Think of your plans for next week. And think of your plans beyond the COVID crisis. So on the count of 3, please cooperate with me. Everyone should participate. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. How many of you held your breath for 30 seconds? Good. How many of you could not make 30 seconds? How did it feel? This is what I want you to experience. I have heard the Attorney General and the Chief Judge say this morning, we have a crisis of justice in America. I agree. What you just experienced holding your breath is what George Floyd had to endure. Of course, the difference is he had no choice about taking a breath when he felt he had arrived at the tipping point. After pleading with Officer Chauvin, quote, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Mama, please help me." The officer kept his knee on his neck, blocking the flow of oxygen to his brain. If you had to quit the exercise between 12 and 20 seconds, then think again what George Floyd's experience was. Laying face down with his cheeks, being rubbed into the gritty roadway, with his hands cuffed behind his back, with Officer Chauvin's knee slowly and deliberately applying pressure on his windpipe. How long do you think he lasted before his last breath? Imagine going through such an agony for 526 seconds, more than 30 times longer than any of us could have done it. In 2020, it was the knee that snuffed out the life of an unarmed Black man. In the 1800s and 1900s, it was a rope. What is similar? Same intention of the perpetrator, same result of the victim. Same intention of the perpetrator, same result of the victim. The crisis of justice must end. If 99.9% of the officers in the 18,000 police departments in the country are good officers, how difficult should it be for that 99.9% to prevent the wrongdoing of the 0.1%? One damning statistic of the American criminal justice system is the rate of incarceration. The American population comprises 3% of the world's population. And the number of people incarcerated in our jails and prisons comprise 25% of the total number of people incarcerated worldwide. The majority of the people incarcerated not surprisingly, in this country are Black and brown. This situation is made worse because at the worst possible time for us, there's also a crisis of leadership in America, especially at the highest level. Our country and all others around the world have been under attack by the COVID-19 virus. That health crisis is a pandemic, a worldwide phenomenon. No place on earth has been spared. The pandemic, in turn, has created a worldwide economic crisis. In our country, businesses have had to close. People have been quarantined, and more than 40 million Americans have been out of work. People literally are choking from the hardships. At the height of the convergence of the justice crisis with the health crisis and the financial crisis, leadership's response has been to build a wall around the people's house, hide in the bunker, and send troops to gas the people peacefully assembled outside. Leadership's behavior has created a constitutional crisis. Not surprisingly, those Americans who are suffering the most from the triple threat of justice crisis, with the economic crisis, the health crisis, are Black Americans and other people of color. These are all justice questions, which we hope the AG's task force will help to address. This triple threat negatively impacts all aspects of the basic human needs of poor people. It affects their income, their housing, their education, their health, their safety, and their general welfare. There is hope that change will come. Clearly, the hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating in this country and around the world are demanding change. The fact that the demonstrators are from every sector of every society tells us that this time is different. The cries of Black Lives Matters, no justice, no peace, require appropriate responses, not words, not studies, not discussions alone. Those cries demand concrete action now. The Access to Justice community, I know, is ready to continue and in fact increase our efforts to protect and pursue the goal of equal justice for all, especially for low-income people who seek to enjoy those basic human rights, such as their housing, health, education, income, and safety. The need will increase, and we are ready to step up and do our part. We will invite members of the bar and members of all the sectors represented this morning to join with us as we address and defeat these triple crises. Our country needs it. The time demands it. We can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilhelm. So we have a lot more folks who would like to say a few words. I see we've been joined by Senator Cardin, Congressman Sarbanes, Congressman Raskin. We're next going to hear the stories of three individuals who've been affected significantly by the pandemic. And the first one of them is Tamara White. Tamara?
Bill, this will be the video.
Yes.
Okay.
I am Amero White. I am a CNA, a certified nursing assistant, which takes care of the elderly, disabled, and special needs individuals. I've been training in the net for over about 16, 17 years. It could be longer. I really do miss my patients. I really enjoyed my job. My patients love me. It's just hard when they expire. It takes a toll on me. But other than that, it's awesome. I just wanted to let you know what happened to me on April 23rd when I went to the market prior to being fortunate enough to have benefits before then. So on April 23rd, I went to the market, and that's the day I usually get my stamp. I went in line and I got embarrassed because it said insignificant funds, and I didn't understand that because I know that I was not supposed to be disrupted or discontinued for any reason on April 23rd. So I've been calling around to the DSS headquarters, and they was giving me a runaround. No one there was helping me. So one day, one of the employees there sent me a link to get in touch with Miss Michelle and Gabrielle. I reached out to them, and they was helping me a whole lot. It reached the central board, which I got in touch with Miss Shaw. And Miss Shaw got on top of everything and was able to help me get my benefits. I've been in food lines, and the food lines didn't give me anything but pancake mix. And I don't think that was healthy enough for my grandma and my son. Because I feel like my son didn't have the opportunity or he wasn't able to choose what he wanted, and he wasn't used to that. He was always able to go in the refrigerator, get a snack, or go get some fruit, or go even get a sandwich or two. And he wasn't able to do that, and I did not like the look on his face. I didn't like to see my grandmother couldn't eat her right iron and her vitamins from the vegetables. It just didn't feel right. And it should not have never took anyone longer than 7 days to provide somebody with their benefits, especially during the pandemic. It's just not right. I think that y'all should not let this happen to anyone else by accepting my story and as well as others. I think the DSS building needs to have more structure and more discipline because they do things like this not just because of the pandemic, but this is 24/7 with them. They just don't care.
Thanks very much. I'm sorry Tamara couldn't be with us virtually. I think Leticia Mclean was unable to make it. And our next speaker will be Joy Fowler. Is Joy with us?
I'm here.
Joy, would you like to say a few words?
Yes. My name is Joy. I'm 26 years old and I'm from Maryland. I'm a single mother with a 4-year-old son. I have always been a hard worker through all my struggles. I've experienced eviction as well as homelessness and have used public benefits before. I have worked hard to get out of those situations. After going through a rapid rehousing program, I started looking for jobs. I went through 3 jobs before finding one I loved. It had a lovely environment, good pay, and employees were treated well. This job allowed me to keep up with my rent payments and other bills. I finally felt like I could sustain myself. Then when COVID-19 hit, I was temporarily laid off. I had no income after working so hard to get off public assistance. It was challenging for me to be motivated to get back on. I got my first apartment, my son had his own room, and I had a car. Now I had to apply for unemployment. When I tried to apply online, they wouldn't allow me because I had more than 3 jobs in 18 months. Then when I called, I got a busy tone or a voice recording that hung up but never an actual person. This went on for 2 months before I received any assistance. During that time of waiting, I had to call everyone I knew to find help with getting food and supplies. This made me feel discouraged and defeated. I have tried my best to use the system and resources given to me to get assistance, but have ultimately wanted to gain independence. I am here because I want to be the voice for people trying to do their best with their families and just need a little extra help. People are willing to do the work and push through. There are just so many obstacles we have to go through just to get assistance. I want to help those who are struggling worse than I am and have not received any assistance. How can they survive? The system is supposed to be a safety blanket for when it's needed the most. We need these systems to work better for us, as well as getting help with navigating the systems. I'm hoping this task force can advocate for people like me. Even though I have a position held by my previous employer, I am continuing to look for work. I still have to find childcare and think about what will happen when unemployment runs out. I don't want to lose everything I work for. Thank you guys for your time and your support.
Thank you, Joy. Thanks for your very touching words. Keep up the good work. We're glad you're persevering, and terribly sorry for what you're going through. And we are going to be try to addressing the very issues that you're talking about. So thank you very much. We've also been joined, I think, recently by Senator Chris Van Hollen and Congressman Kwesi Mfume. I think what we'll do is we'll hear next from Rena Shaw, then we'll Then we'll go through our congressional delegation, and I will try to recognize you all in the order in which you came into the conversation. So Rena is the executive director of the Maryland Access to Justice Commission. She is a longtime advocate of social justice, social change, and she is in her current job building a strong and sustainable future for the Access to Justice Commission by implementing programs that increase access and quality of justice for all Marylanders. We're pleased that she's agreed to serve as a vice chair of the task force. Rena?
Thank you so much, Attorney General Frosh. Before I begin, it is my understanding that Carolina from the Public Justice Center can read Ms. Mclean's statement. So if Carolina can do that briefly, I'd really appreciate it. I just wanted to recognize that Ms. Mclean sent in a statement.
Hi, thank you so much, Rena. I'm Carolina. I'm a paralegal at the Public Justice Center, and I've been working with Ms. Mclean extensively over the past few weeks. And she is excited to share a statement with us about what she's been going through. And so I will be reading her statement. My sound's on. Everyone can hear me okay, right? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. My name is Letisa Mclean, and I'm a single mom of 2 kids. I rent a row home in Baltimore City, and for a long time, my landlord neglected the property. Last November, I decided to file a rent escrow action in the district court. A city housing inspector found 14 violations in my home, violations my landlord wasn't inclined to fix. The court found the problem so severe that it abated my rent and ordered me to pay a reduced rent into escrow. My landlord didn't show up for any of the 4 court dates I've had so far. Once the COVID-19 crisis began, my landlord started to show a great deal of interest in the property. He started calling me multiple times a day to demand payment. Then he started driving by my house. He'd come by with cars full of men to demand payment. He'd stake out my house and let me know that he was watching who was coming and going. He'd approach me on foot while I walked from my car to my house. He threatened to put my kids and me out on the street. He said I had to pay him, not the court, or else he would change the locks. I paid him 4 times because of this consistent intimidation, $3,550. He still didn't stop, still called me up 5 in the morning, still came by to yell at my kids and me. So finally, I sought legal assistance. Because I didn't have access to the court system, I didn't have anywhere to turn for help when this harassment began. All I knew is that I had to make sure that my kids had a home to stay in. My landlord took advantage of my fears to intimidate me into making payments I never should have made. And I should not have to worry now that a judge won't hear my side of the story when the court resumes. Our state leaders should take every step to protect renters, consumers, and other folks who are struggling in this pandemic. I hope that our state puts in place stronger than ever measures to ensure fairness in the legal system. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's a wonderful statement. Very important points raised by that. So thank you very much, Carolina. Rena, take it away.
Thank you, Attorney General Frosh. And I thank Ms. White and Ms. Mclean and Ms. Fowler. We really appreciate your statements, and we invite you to remain involved in this work. As mentioned, I'm Rena Shaw. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Access to Justice Commission. I am very humbled to serve as one of the vice chairs of this task force. A2JC is a proud partner of the MSBA, and we're honored to have been chosen by the Attorney General as a partner on this task force. Foremost, I want to applaud and thank the Attorney General for his leadership during this tumultuous and trying time, and for using his power and the power of all esteemed leaders convened on the Congressional Advisory Committee and this task force to shine a spotlight on the civil legal needs of Marylanders arising out of the COVID-19 pandemic. The stories we heard today are just the tip of the iceberg. They demonstrate how navigating the civil justice system without legal information or help is disempowering and unjust. In fact, we know that Marylanders lose their civil cases and therefore get evicted, have their wages garnished, do not receive lifelines like food stamps or unemployment benefits, not because they did anything wrong, but because they did not have the legal information or help they needed. And this already happened before COVID-19 hit. In 2 short months, unemployment filings have soared from 2,000 to well over 660,000 in Maryland. As courts reopen, we expect to see a huge spike in civil legal court cases about evictions and consumer debt and more. More people than ever will need help to resolve their civil legal conflicts at a time when some sources of funding for that help will have already declined by over 70%. We cannot expect Marylanders to navigate the even more complicated web of new local, state, and national laws, rules and protections, different protocols and procedures in each court across the state, different remote technologies and platforms, all on their own, without brutal consequences. We are not talking about mere inconveniences. We are talking about miscarriages of justice on a scale and magnitude that no one in power should allow. And we know that these injustices will harm Black individuals, families, and communities more. A recent study showed that the number of evictions of Black women was 296% more than the evictions of white men in Baltimore City. This is but one example of many. This moment demands deep introspection and brave and decisive action to unwind racial inequities in all systems, including the civil justice system. Civil legal aid must be a vital component of the public recovery from the current public health and economic crisis. Equal justice under law demands this. I will conclude with the words of the great Martin Luther King. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action. I cannot wait to get to work with all of you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Very well said, Rena. Thank you very much. Look forward to working with you. Okay, so let me go through our congressional delegation in the order in which they joined our meeting. Congressman Sarbanes, I believe you were the first. I've got, after that, Congressman Raskin, Senator Cardin, Senator Van Hollen, and Congressman Mfume, and perhaps others will join as well. But Congressman Sarbanes, are you still with us? I think you may have dropped off for at least a moment. Senator Cardin, would you like to say a few words?
Well, Attorney General Frost, first of all, thank you very much for your leadership. This is desperately needed. And I think the statement that's been made, we've seen with the George Floyd tragedy, the racial injustice in our criminal justice system and in our policing, but it goes well beyond that. We see these racial inequities in employment, we see it in wealth, we see it in healthcare, and we certainly see it in civil legal services. So I want to applaud you for setting up this task force, recognizing that COVID-19 has unmasked a great deal of inequities in our community, and the needs are going to be greater than ever before. I just want to share with you an experience that I had when I was first elected to the House of Representatives. I had a chance to chair an advisory council of the Maryland Legal Services Corporation, and later became the chair of the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. We did an assessment back then that underscores the points that your task force needs to take a look at. As guardians of our legal system, attorneys, we have a responsibility to make sure there's access, equal access to justice. And if you don't have a lawyer in a civil matter, you are not getting equal access to justice. And there's not enough resources being devoted today to make sure that there's equal access to justice in our civil litigations. So we need to close that gap. The recommendations that we made, it was over 30 years ago, led to the clinical law program, clinical programs at our law schools, led to more pro bono, led to increased funding for our legal services organizations. We need to take this opportunity to dramatically expand the opportunities for civil representation. And I just am proud to be part of this advisory group. I tell you that as your federal partner, we play an important role here, and we need to establish the political climate to understand that we need to do more as a country to make sure that equal justice really is provided to all. So I'm proud to be part of your team.
We are very grateful for your participation, Senator. Nobody does a better job in the Senate, with the possible exception of Chris Van Hollen, than fighting for Marylanders and fighting for justice. And so thank you very much. And I know your time is precious. We're very grateful that you could spend a few minutes with us. Congressman Raskin, I saw on the list earlier, I think he may have had to drop off, but Jamie, if you're with us, jump in. And if not, let me then ask Senator Van Hollen if he would be willing to say a few words.
Well, thank you, Brian. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, I want to start by thanking our Attorney General, Brian Frosh, for pulling this important task force together at an urgent moment, and thank him for his other efforts in the fight for justice in Maryland and around the country for a very long time, including his leadership on bail reform and so many other things. And like Senator Cardin and other members of the Congressional Delegation, I'm really pleased to join you at this moment. As Wilhelm Joseph said, and he does a remarkable job, we are at a moment of reckoning in this country with the murder of George Floyd on the heels of Breonna Taylor's unjustified killing, and a long line that we all know has been a disgrace and stain on our country, including Freddie Gray in Baltimore. And we need to address these injustices in an urgent manner. I am pleased that we introduced quickly the Justice in Policing Act in the United States House and in the United States Senate. We're going to be pushing very hard, and I know Attorney General Frosh, you were involved in pushing for that legislation on behalf of other state attorney generals. But as we know, that is a first step, and we also know it's just one example of the racism ingrained in too many of our institutions and in society. And COVID-19 has laid bare those inequities. And many of us have been working to close those gaps for a long time, but this is now an urgent matter. As Rena said in her comments, justice delayed is justice denied. And so whether it's in healthcare or education or housing, we need to move urgently. And we need to move urgently in this area of access to justice in civil law proceedings. Because we have a terrible situation in this country where, because people couldn't pay some small portion of the rent, they can be out of the streets through eviction. You get a parking ticket and you're not able to pay it because you're stretched thin, and all of a sudden you may be losing your license. This pattern of effectively criminalizing poverty has got to stop. We know so many Americans are on the edge financially, and even more so as a result of COVID-19. And we also know that the impacts have been disproportionately felt by communities of color, especially Black Americans. That is also why the Congressional Delegation sent a letter recently to Governor Hogan saying that he needs to come up with a testing strategy in Maryland using the over $200 million of federal funds to make sure that resources and testing is directed to communities that have been hardest hit and work with trusted partners. So this is an urgent moment for our country. And I want to thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for bringing us together. Rena, we look forward to working with you, with Mr. Joseph and other members of the task force so that we can really meet this moment in the way we have to. And I look forward to working with all the members.
Senator Van Hollen, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I've traveled all over the state with Senator Van Hollen, talking about issues that face consumers, poor people, and just plain folks. And I know his longtime commitment to fighting for justice, and we really appreciate your willingness to join this effort. I see that we have been rejoined by Congressman Sarbanes. So let me ask you to make a few remarks. Congressman Sarbanes
Thank you.
is one of the sponsors of the policing legislation in Congress, and a real.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Brian. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'll be very brief. Just thank you for assembling this amazing coalition of organizations and individuals who've devoted, in many instances, their life's work to these justice issues. I think having a task force assembled around the impacts, the justice impact or the injustice impact of the COVID-19 outbreak makes perfect sense. There's so much that can be done to focus the public and the legal community on ways to respond to this crisis. But looking at it more broadly, we know the fact of the matter is that those communities that feel disproportionately the impact of police brutality are the same communities that feel a disproportionate impact when it comes to access to healthcare, when it comes to economic dislocation, and frankly, when it comes to political power. All of these things are connected. Legal advocates have an incredible role to play in trying to address that disproportionate impact and to promote the kind of access to justice that is at the heart of this particular effort. I see so many people and organizations on this call that I had the privilege of working with when I was on the board of the Public Justice Center and president of that organization. It's an amazing team in Maryland. And frankly, I think what you're doing can be a model for what others can do around the country. No surprise there, because this Maryland Attorney General is often the one who's setting the standard nationally for what we need to do at the state level to respond to these very, very tough issues. So thanks again for pulling this together. I certainly look forward in this advisory role, however we're connecting our delegation to the effort to be of assistance and to be a resource. Thank you in particular to everybody else on the call for the work that you're doing. And I yield back.
Thanks very much for joining us, Congressman, and thanks for the great work that you do on Capitol Hill in protecting our right to vote and fighting against voter suppression, among many other important initiatives. Now let me recognize the junior member of the Congressional Delegation, the once and future Congressman, Kwesi Mfume. Congressman Mfume, are you with us?
I am. I needed to unmute, but thank you very much, Mr. Attorney General, and I want to thank everybody else who is a part of the call. Ben Cardin and Chris Van Hollen, both distinguished senators from our state, enunciated much of the things that we are working on as a team, as did Senator Sarbanes a moment ago. And I'm sure if Congressman Raskin gets back on, he will join into that chorus. I want to thank everyone for the commitment that you're making, first of all. I think it's important, for me at least, to also thank the two people, one of which testified, the other which sent testimony to be a part of this, to underscore the fact that at the end of the day, what we're talking about is real people, and we're talking about real people in a real way. I think it would be important, without trying to determine the direction of the task force, but as someone who's been asked to be a part of the advisory group, that the more specificity the task force can bring to the goals that it is attempting to reach, the better. And I do mean action goals. I know I've read the statement, and there are a number of things that you want to examine, review, and discuss. But it is also extremely important, maybe you already have this, to identify real action goals that people on the ground can readily relate to, because there's always a suspicion whenever there is a task force that it's a Band-Aid to get us through an issue. And in this issue, it's COVID, it's George Floyd, it's a lot of other things that are wrong. And I, for one, certainly don't want anybody thinking that this task force is a Band-Aid in any way. So to the extent that you can tie some specific goals that people on the ground quickly understand and articulate, that would be good. And I'm not trying to give you a sense of what you ought to do, but what I think would help you do what you have to do. The other thing is that I heard a moment ago that there is a great disparity out here in a number of different areas, evictions being one, and the discussion about Black people being evicted versus white. Let me just offer a word of caution here that injustice has no color, that there are Latinos who are equally affected by the injustices of our society, that there are poor whites, even in my district up and down Monroe Street, that are affected. And while Black people tend to carry the brunt of that and tend to be the face of all of that, even Dr. King would argue that we must include everybody if we're going to talk about a rising tide and finding a way to help. So I would just offer that for your thought and your suggestion. Also, African Americans in this society have undergone, as all of you know, a great deal of frustration at blimps and beeps in our society that tend to pop up when there's an issue. And many are pretty much tired, for lack of a better term, for not getting real action most of the time, but a lot of efforts that are designed to react. Again, I don't want this to be seen as that. All of you are very, very sincere people. You've got great histories of involvement, and your pedigree is clear in terms of social justice and civil rights. So I would just kind of offer that for your thinking as you think about everything else today. As I said before, am absolutely appreciative of those who have, in a very real way, not that you needed anything else to do, but decided to be a part of the Attorney General's effort because you believe the Attorney General and his heart is in the right place, and because you believe that doing nothing does not create an answer to anybody's problem. So thank you all for that. I stand ready with the rest of the delegation to do whatever I can do. I've been on the call since its beginning, so I've had a chance to hear a lot and think a lot. And to the extent that I can do anything at all, Mr. Attorney General and members of the task force, to help move the needle here, please count me in.
Thank you very much, Congressman. I did not see you in the beginning of this, the meeting, but really appreciate the time commitment you've made to this. And we've, of course, talked about it in advance, and everyone knows your lifelong commitment, your lifelong fight for civil rights. And we really look forward to drawing on your experience and expertise, and really appreciate your willingness to help. I think there's one more person who would like to speak before we take questions from the press, and I apologize for that. But our other vice chair, U.S. Court of Appeals Judge Andre Davis, would like to say a few words, I believe. Judge Davis?
Brian, simply to say, as others have already said, how grateful we are for your leadership and the extraordinary leadership of Chief Judge Barbera, our federal delegation, and all of the incredible leaders on this call. I'm just so humbled to be a part of this effort. And I want to salute my dear friend, Wilhelm Joseph, for his moving remarks and for his lifelong leadership on these issues. So I think it was Senator Van Hollen who commented, we are so fortunate to be a part of a Maryland that has just extraordinary leadership and dedication to these efforts. And so we are serving our fellow citizens and residents in a way that they will be proud of. Thank you very much for including me in this effort.
Thank you very much for being with us, and I'm personally looking forward to working closely with you. With that, are there members of the press who have questions for us? And after we hear from you, perhaps there are other members of the task force who would like to say a few words. But are there questions from the press at the moment? All right. I think we may have said everything that needs to be said for the time being. Unless anyone else has any.
Attorney General?
Yes. Steve.
The Daily Record. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Okay. One thing we've talked, we talked even when you chaired the Judicial Proceedings Committee, there was much talk about civil Gideon and whether there should be a right for civil litigants, at least civil defendants, a right to counsel, just for these very reasons that in case of landlord-tenant, certainly the tenant is generally always at a disadvantage, no matter how wealthy they are, because landlords, just by their general practice of knowing the law, they're always in court. So is there any motion, is there any proceeding now to propose legislation or whatever to have civil Gideon?
I think that's on the top of our list of issues to consider, or solutions, partial solutions to consider. It's been at the forefront of the work of many of the people who were on this task force, including, I forgot to mention him previously, former Attorney General Steve Sachs. It's obviously very costly, but when you're talking about people losing their homes to eviction or foreclosure, or losing their jobs, or losing their children, it obviously is extremely important for them to have representation in court. So civil Gideon is going to be one of the things that we look at. And if we could find the money, I personally would want to do it in a heartbeat.
Brian?
Yes.
Can I just speak briefly to that? I just want people on the call to know that we did introduce, I think within the last 2 months, a bill in Congress that seeks to fortify this idea of a right to counsel in civil cases. It's something that obviously working with the Public Justice Center and a lot of the advocates on this call, Wilhelm and Steve Sachs and others for years has been a priority for me. And we've introduced that legislation. It would create sort of framework for litigants, pro se and otherwise, to seek that opportunity and have the opportunity described to them, et cetera. So I'll make sure we share that with Steve and with the task force as well, because we are trying to help support this effort as much as possible at the federal level.
Hi, this is Emily Davies. I'm with the Washington Post. I'm just wondering if there's any sort of timeline we can point to, either in terms of meeting frequency or a time at which you hope to have a list of objectives or anything like that.
Yes, we plan to have 3 meetings of the full commission or task force between now and December. We will have subcommittees working in tandem with that and separately. And we hope to have recommendations ready for the General Assembly when it reconvenes in January. So it's going to be fast work. I hope it will be well considered and thorough. I'm not sure that we will finish our work by the time the General Assembly convenes, but we will have recommendations ready for them in January.
Attorney General, this is Susan Hogan from NBC4. So when we talk to our viewers tonight and do this story, what can we tell them? Like, what are they going to see different when this is all when it comes to fruition? What will look different for them? I mean, those who are facing eviction for the first time and going into the civil system and help us out with that. Like, I'm trying to understand what is going to look different for them.
Well, let me say that a different look is going to take some time. I think we're going to face a tsunami of evictions and foreclosures when the stays that have been implemented end. They're currently scheduled to end in July. And the courts will be overwhelmed. People will be in danger of losing their homes. Many will end up homeless. And so our objective is to flatten that curve, if you will, to try to avoid homelessness, rampant loss of folks' sources of income, places to live. We hope to be able to suggest solutions to the problem of people not receiving the public benefits to which they're entitled. We're addressing, or we hope to address, the biggest, most obvious problems that I think we're seeing on your TV station in the press in general. But we will be only able to recommend solutions. We won't be able to implement them. We hope that the persuasive impact of this group will be such that we can achieve real change from our policymakers and through our court system.
Attorney General Frosch, this is Mary Rose Madden from WYPR, NPR, Maryland. So for the immediate problem that you just identified, the tsunami of evictions that's approaching, what is this task force's absolute immediate response to that problem? And what solution do you offer?
So we haven't met yet. So I don't think the task force is in a position to say we've got a solution. This is not an easy issue. People are going to be suffering homelessness, but landlords are struggling to pay their mortgages because they're not receiving the rent. And there are legal and policy issues that have to be sorted out and resolved. I can't offer a solution today because the task force has yet to do its work. But what I can say is this is at the top of our radar, and we're going to be doing the best we can to prevent homelessness, prevent folks from going hungry and losing public benefits, et cetera.
Attorney General, it's Susan Hogan one more time from NBC4. So I'm trying to understand exactly how this is going to work. And I understand that you have not met yet, but for those who are going to be facing the consumer debt issues and heading into court. So, are there going to be people in court, helping them out, like physically being there to walk them through the system? Is that part of the objective, is to give these people who've never seen this court system before this opportunity to have some help?
Yes, that's one of the objectives. That's what Civil Gideon is all about. Gideon versus Wainwright was the seminal case on right to counsel in criminal proceedings. But people don't, as we all know, have the right to representation when they're about to be thrown out of their home, when they're about to lose their child. Many folks don't even understand what leverage they have when they're slapped with a suit for eviction or foreclosure. Tenants have the right to live in a habitable place, and when it's overrun by vermin or subject to constant leaks and mold and other vermin or pests, they have a right to go to court and say, wait a minute, you want me to pay for this, but the landlord isn't giving me the services that he says he is, and I'm entitled to some relief based on that. People don't understand rights like that, and having a lawyer there with them can make an enormous difference. And so that is certainly one of the objectives, but again, can't speak for the task force or what it might ultimately recommend.
Brian, this is Chris. Can I
please
chime in on that? Because in the emergency moment that we're in with respect to COVID-19, one of the best things we can do to avoid evictions in the coming months is for the Senate to take up and pass the bill that passed the House of Representatives a number of weeks ago called the HEROES Act. And the reason why that would be a huge help is that we'll extend the enhanced unemployment benefits for the thousands of people who are out of work. While that relief has been very difficult and slow to access in Maryland because of the backup in our unemployment system, once people navigate that process, they're entitled to that additional amount going back, but that enhanced amount expires July 31st. And we know there's still going to be thousands of people out of work through no fault of their own. So it's really important that, at least in one form or another, we extend that enhanced unemployment benefit. The House bill also has a $100 billion rental assistance fund for exactly the purpose we're talking about, to help people who can't afford to pay their rent because of this emergency moment with additional assistance. And then, of course, the task force will address both these in the near term, but very importantly in the long term as well. These are all issues in one form or another that were with us before COVID-19. They've been exacerbated by COVID-19. But I do believe that the proposals coming out of this task force are going to do a lot of long-term good. But in the very short term, passing the HEROES Act will go a long way to preventing the evictions we're talking about.
Brian, may I chime in here?
Sure.
To Ms. Hogan's question, I can share with her what exists now. There is a network of civil legal aid providers in Maryland that currently provide the kinds of services you mentioned. The largest of them is Maryland Legal Aid, with 12 offices throughout the state and 160 lawyers. A very important addition to that, doing exactly what you asked, someone walking into court, not necessarily a poor person, but someone trying to help themselves. There is the Maryland Civil Legal Assistance Program, MCLA, which is funded by the court. And that has outlets, so to speak, in Glen Burnie, Anne Arundel County, Annapolis, Prince George County, Upper Marlboro, Salisbury, Frederick, Baltimore City. So a litigant walks in there and can go and get guidance. They are not taking up with the client, but they get guidance of how to navigate the system. That helps the court, it helps the individual, and it helps society. One of the things we're looking at is how to expand that. Credit should be given to Chief Judge Bell and Chief Judge Barbera. Under Judge Bell, that was initiated, under Chief Judge Barbera, it has been expanded tremendously with the leadership of Judge Morrissey, who's heading up the district court. So that does exist at the moment. One question would be how to expand the availability of those services.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that.
Welcome.
Any other questions from the press?
Another question from NPR in Maryland, WYPR. You said you'll be meeting as a group 3 times between now and December. When is the first meeting?
I don't have the date. Raquel may have the date, but I don't. It's within the next week or 2. But I can't tell. It's sometime in June, and as I say, a lot of the work that we hope to and expect to have done will be done by subcommittees, and they will be meeting more frequently than the full task force. Anyone else? All right. Let me say again, thank you very much. It's really impressive that we have Congressman M. Fume here from start to finish, and also our other congressional representatives and everyone on this task force, Judge Cox, and these are just the ones that I'm seeing on my screen right now. Everyone on this task force has extremely important things to do and is very busy, and we deeply appreciate the fact that you're willing to help us in this endeavor. If I haven't mentioned him previously, I want to recognize Ward Coe, who is the chairman of the Access to Justice Commission. We deeply appreciate his work and his cooperation with us, and also to the legislators from Maryland who will be working with us for ideas for them. I thank you all very, very much. Look forward to talking with you very soon. Good morning.